Yeah.
So just merely having like you offered me kratom at the beginning of this podcast, and I declined the kratom. Right? Why did I decline the kratom?
Because you know a lot more about kratom than I do.
Well, I'm not even saying that kratom is bad. That's not the point. But the point is that I'm aware of it.
It's addictive.
Yeah, people become dependent on it. Definitely. Yeah. Which in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
I'm very dependent on caffeine. So
right.
So dependence in and of itself is not necessarily bad. Although I would argue it's not.
I can't remember a day in the last 10 years that I have. I mean, there's been in the last 10 years, I could probably count on two hands how many days I've gone without a cup of coffee. Not many days. Like I drink coffee every single day. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Maybe kratom's not as bad as coffee.
Right.
You know, I don't know.
Right.
So I know this shit's amazing. Like it is so much better than caffeine.
Right.
And I mean, as far as what you know about kratom, I know you've done a lot of research on it, and you know far more than I do. I watched part of your documentary when you went to, I think, Thailand, and you met with some guys who were basically, they had kratom trees.
Yeah.
How does it work? And other than the amazing euphoric stimulating feeling I get when I drink it, what is like, is there any downside or any long-term negative effects of it?
The long-term effects are not all that well studied. It seems reasonably safe with occasional use. I mean, it is an opioid. It's a low potency opioid. Right. So dependence is not uncommon with people that use it regularly. And then you have the sort of withdrawal syndrome that comes with that. Unlike more common opioids that are related to morphine, it doesn't really tend to cause respiratory depression, which is a big thing, because the main reason that people don't like opioids, or that there's this extreme fear of opioids in the United States, is because they kill people.
Right.
That's like the caffeine example shows that people are somewhat comfortable with dependence. Dependence in and of itself is not usually conceptualized as a big problem, but as soon as people start dying from using a drug, then that dramatically changes the way it's perceived by the public for obvious reasons. And because kratom tends not to kill people, relatively speaking, it's extremely safe compared to morphine type or fentanyl type compounds, then it doesn't carry those same problems. That's not to say that it's without problems.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that are able to transition off of other opioids onto kratom, and that's probably a better move. It's very complicated. There's not a simple answer to these questions. It's like whenever people say, is this good or bad? There's no answer to it. It's like if you were drinking yourself to death and you're able to transition onto like 1 can of this per day, I would say that's probably better.
Yeah.
But if you're just not doing anything and then you become dependent on this, I would assume that that's a step in the wrong direction, probably.
Yeah.
So it's
a good exercise to abstain from things for a period of time if you tend to enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I notice myself on the weekends, I don't drink any of it, but I catch myself thinking about it. I'm like, oh, it's noon. I could go for a kratom. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm thinking about it, so that means I shouldn't have one. I should go a couple more days without having one.
And then there's also the obvious issue that if you're taking a drug to address a problem that you are likely to encounter continuously for the rest of your life, then you're setting yourself up to use that drug continuously for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So if the issue, like I do use kratom occasionally as an alternative to ibuprofen if I've been like exercising a lot and I'm in pain.
Yeah.
But then you have to ask yourself, like, do I plan to be sore after exercising a lot in the future? Because if you will, then the answer is you may be using this all the time. Or I mean, another example would obviously be using some kind of hypnotic to go to sleep.
Right.
It's like your chances are you're going to be going to sleep quite a few times across your life. So if you don't develop healthy
once or twice,
if you don't develop a healthy technique for falling asleep, then you're setting yourself up for a lifetime of dependence.
So why did you decline the kratom?
I recently, especially, I've seen a lot of people becoming dependent on it. Again, not really necessarily a big problem, but it's just made me a little bit wary. And I'm not somebody that is like immune to addiction by any means. Like I'm looking at your Zyn
You want one?
No, I don't want one. But my podcast is sponsored by
Lucy.
Yeah.
I have those too. I like the Lucy's better.
Yeah. And so I'm friends with the guy that owns it. He'll send me a crate of these things, and I know how it goes. It's like I'll consume the entirety of it, and then it's not until it's all gone that I have a moment to reflect and think, is it really good that I just consumed like...
Everybody is obsessed with the nicotine pouches. Everybody's on them now. It's crazy how they've just stormed society over the last 2 years.
It's crazy. I mean, nicotine is so unbelievably addictive.
Yeah.
It is something else. It's also relatively, I don't want to say totally innocuous, but it's not, you can be crazily addicted to it and it's not necessarily a big deal, which is one of the reasons that it's so easy to get miserably addicted to it. It's like if I take that Zyn, if I were to consume that Zyn, not that I want to, I would. It wouldn't be a big deal. It wouldn't necessarily be a big deal. It would really just be setting myself up to continue using it. And I'm really good at convincing. If I can convince myself that something is beneficial for me, then I can almost always use it.
Yeah.
So I've never been drawn to any kind of self-destructive pattern. But if it's like, oh, you're on this podcast, and it would really kind of sharpen your thinking a little bit, and it would be a little bit better probably if you were to consume that. And then I can justify. Same thing with things like Ambien for sleep, where it's like, oh, well, I'm doing a thing tomorrow.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, his headphone cables.
Oh. I feel like it's overworked, a little overstretched. Ambien,
yeah, very easy to, because you always have to do something the next day, and so it's very easy to convince yourself, oh, I should really
do some mental gymnastics to prove to yourself that it would be beneficial for you.
It would be very beneficial.
Yeah.
It would be
productive.
It would be damaging not to take the Ambien.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things I hate about the Zyns, though, is it's very vasorestrictive. So like if you're doing any sort of like activity or exercise, it's counterproductive for that. Right. So like for some reason it's supposed to be mentally stimulating, but how is it mentally stimulating if it's like if it's vasorestrictive, right? Don't you want more blood flow to your brain?
There's a few stimulating things that seem to reduce blood flow to the brain paradoxically.
Really?
I mean, it's not, the pharmacology isn't mediated purely by the vascular effects. It's mostly through the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor.
Right.
But it's hard. It's hard to know how much of this stuff is self-deception. Are you really, what is the difference between thinking that you're working better and working better? And how would you know? And could something make you feel like you're working worse, but you're actually working better? This is the whole paradox of nootropic drugs. When people say, oh, how do you know if a nootropic works? And people say, oh, I think my memory is really improved. Conceivably, something could be damaging your memory, and you would think that your memory is improved by virtue of being unaware of what you've forgotten. It's like a Dunning-Kruger type scenario.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I love these ones. I think these are better than the Zyns. These are just nootropic pouches with caffeine and nootropic stuff in them.
Yeah.
They don't have the if I take too many Zyns during the day, I start to feel sick.
Yeah.
Like nauseous kind of.
Oh yeah.
Like if I take 3 of them, I can't do 3 of them in a day. I can do like maybe max 2 of them. But the other ones, I don't feel that effect at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's weird.
I mean, just one quick story, and it actually involves Thomas. I don't think he'd mind me telling the story. I think it's like, so Thomas and I lived together, and Thomas's father died from cancer, and he was in a very typical scenario that people are in when they have a loved one die of cancer. His father had been prescribed morphine for the cancer pain, and I remember him coming back to the apartment that we were living in. He had this big bottle full of these blue 5 milligram morphine sulfate tablets. It was just like completely full. And he put it on the counter and he said, help yourself. You can have as many as you want. And I took one. I thought it was okay. It made me really constipated. I wasn't really into it. And that was it. That was the end of my experimentation with morphine sulfate. Thomas, on the other hand, became addicted to morphine.
Oh, wow.
So we have 2 people living in the exact same apartment
Right.
with the exact same access to the exact same drug, yet one of them becomes dependent and the other one doesn't.
Wow.
Why is that?
Right.
If it were just the drug, wouldn't we both have become equally dependent on the morphine? We both had access to the same bottle, but it wasn't just the drug. Thomas was going through a lot of emotional pain as a result of losing his father.
Right.
I was in a relatively emotionally stable situation and was less susceptible to addiction for that reason. So if you deny all these psychological, environmental, social aspects of addiction, you're fundamentally misrepresenting the problem and you'll never help anyone.
And everyone's different in regards to like their chemical makeup too, right? Like depending on like emotions or what their lifestyle is, like we're like these bags of hormones and different chemicals that is constantly fluctuating. Like we're never in a solid state.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
So
And
like drugs are going to interact with everybody differently.
Right. So like I experience extremely severe hangovers. Like I could have 3 drinks.
Same here.
And the next day I would be just off. The next day would be useless. I wouldn't be like vomiting and, have like a splitting headache. I would just feel like shit kind of.
Yeah.
Other people can have 5 drinks with lunch and it's nothing. So they're fundamentally responding to this in a different way as a result of likely genetic metabolic differences between us. So the punishing effect of the alcohol hangover just doesn't apply to them as much. And those same people are going to be more susceptible to alcoholism.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors.
I've always found it so interesting how people I know, I have friends that can function and live their lives and are ultra successful in their lives that can go day to day doing like hard drugs. Like I'm talking about like Ambien, cocaine.
Ambien.
Yeah.
You call Ambien a hard drug?
For me, yeah, I would call it a hard drug. I'm super like lightweight. I'm a pussy when it comes to drugs. Okay. But like I have friends like that can just function off this stuff and do it every single day. And I'm not talking just Ambien. I'm talking going from Ambien to Adderall to cocaine to Vicodins and muscle relaxers, like all in the course of a day. And they're like arguably they're more with it than I am.
Oh, yeah. Well, you become tolerant as well.
Right.
That's the other thing. But yeah, I mean, the way you describe it, you make it sound crazy.
Yeah,
but
to me, it's crazy.
Yeah, but people drink coca tea in a lot of South America. They're consuming cocaine every day. It's not a big deal. It kind of depends on the culture, how you're doing it, what the dose is. I mean, people take 80 milligrams of Adderall a day.
It's so
fucking
crazy
nuts
to me, dude.
But for those people, it's just normal. In the same way that nicotine very rapidly becomes just normal. Right now, if I were to take that Zyn that's
it's staring at you,
staring at me intently from over there, it would be wild. It would be
really.
Oh yeah, it would be wild.
Wow.
It would be a wild ride that I will not take, and because I have no tolerance, I stopped using nicotine.
Really?
For now, I may be back,
sure.
but it's been a little while, and I'm gonna see how far I can go with this. And how's
it been so far?
It's been fine. You can live without it.
Yeah. Did you notice any sort of crash or any sort of like withdrawal?
A little bit, yeah. But that's useful as well. I think is to actually analyze what it is that you feel that you're missing, what it is that it was doing for you, because it's not always entirely intuitive. I mean, I felt that way with cannabis. I don't think I would have really known, but for me, and I think for a lot of people, I would use it just to like reduce my annoyance or anger. That became the kind of thing, is like you're annoyed, you're angry, smoke some weed, chill out.
Wow.
But then again, it's sort of like taking Ambien to go to sleep. A typical life involves numerous occasions where you feel annoyance, and if you don't develop a healthy way of contending with annoying situations, you're just going to be all bent out of shape.
Sure. Yeah. But what I was like when I was explaining my buddies that I know that use Ambien to go to sleep and Adderall to wake up every day, I was like, it feels like to me you're just burning the candle at both ends, and it can't be a healthy way to exist. But somehow these people manage to not only exist, but thrive.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know. That's just, to me, it's kind of unfathomable.
You can do it. It's whether or not it's good just depends on so many factors. I would say all else equal, it's probably better not to.
Yeah.
But again, you do have people that struggle horribly with insomnia. Maybe if they just take 5 milligrams of zolpidem before bed, it's better for them. It just kind of depends. For me, is I travel a lot, and when I'm traveling, I'm always working. And so it never feels like, oh, I'm just going to tough it out and not sleep before a strictly scheduled chemistry project where every day matters. Like, it just feels too, again, but this is my rationalization. There's too much at stake. I can't, I'm about to go on a big chemistry voyage, and it's like, you better believe.
You gotta put some high octane gas in your body before you do that. That makes sense. My one of my buddies in particular that uses Ambien a lot, he'll explain to me sometimes how he has security cameras all over his house. So he'll like fight the urge to go to sleep after he takes the Ambien, and he'll go into one of the rooms in his house where he has a monitor that shows all of his cameras, and he said he'll be staring at like his driveway camera, and he'll see like a unicorn walk across the driveway, and he like hallucinates on it.
Yeah, that can happen.
Often.
It doesn't tend to, I had a little bit of that when I first used it. Once you become a little bit tolerant to it, the dominant effect is a sort of ultra disinhibited delirium. So that's like the kind of Roseanne Barr type situation where you're like tweeting some crazy shit that you don't remember. Like, that's the real, so it's not so much for most people that they start seeing unicorns. It's more like your entire sense of social, professional caution goes out the window because you're just totally disinhibited. You know, you have these examples of people like masturbating on planes or things like that, and it's like
they're often on shit like Ambien.
Yeah, and I could imagine it. I could imagine how, like, on one hand, you could see someone being a sex criminal and using that as an excuse. On the other hand, it's crazily disinhibiting. It really does whack you out. I say this as someone who is extremely sympathetic to the excitement. Like, I can't tell you how many of these things I've had myself. One that I've been looking at for years, it's very fringe, is this idea that astrology has been weaponized by the government, right? And there is some evidence for this, right? And you can even make a case that is evidence-based but somewhat tenuous, that the entire Reagan administration war on drugs was astrologically mediated.
How?
Yeah. It's pretty wild, where you have Nancy Reagan was an actress, was a kind of low-level actress, and is sort of like a character who's sort of analogous to Melania Trump in a lot of ways, where she wasn't taken seriously. Everybody's making fun of her. She's not like a Michelle Obama type person who has political ambitions, who, you know, is using her role to disseminate ideas that are constructive. She spends something like $40,000 getting a new set of china for the White House, and everybody makes fun of her ruthlessly. And this is where our taxpayer money is going, and how frivolous and how stupid. And so she's having this PR crisis, and she's also really into astrology. Both her and Ronald Reagan are really into astrology, and they have an astrologer named Joan Quigley, and this is a fact, this is like a 100% established fact. In the midst of this PR crisis, she's consulting with Joan Quigley about what to do, and Joan Quigley tells her, which is probably pretty good PR advice, you need a mission. You need something that you can bring to the American people that will show that you are concerned. And your mission, because Neptune is in the 12th house, will be America's struggle with drugs. Right? So this is like unfathomable human suffering may have come from this borderline random astrological whim. And when you add to that, there's some other kind of interesting little bits and pieces of evidence. There's a CIA whistleblower named Miles Copeland who wrote in a book called The Game Player about the CIA using astrology computers that have been compromised by the government to deliver disinformation to foreign heads of state. So you give this astrology computer to the president of Ghana and you say, enjoy. And the output of the computer is aligned with U.S. interests if they want to, for example, organize a coup or something like that. So there are all these and this is written about by a person who did work in the CIA. It's very difficult to corroborate all of this. Maybe he's making it up, but what a weird thing to make up on top of that.
Astrology computer. I've never even heard of that.
Yeah. And there was a bizarrely large amount of resources that were actually invested into astrology computers during that period in the 1970s, including military funding. Again, it's pretty wild. So I actually have the astrology computer, the Digicomp DR70 astrology mini computer that arguably is responsible for the war on drugs. There it is right there. It's a beaut.
Wow. The one on the left?
Yeah, the one on the left.
Wow, blow that thing up. That's crazy. Yeah. Where did you get that?
I got it from Nancy Reagan's astrologer's astrologer.
That's the best story ever I've ever heard.
It's got an ignition like a car. You put a key in the computer to turn it on to rev that bad boy.
Damn. Yeah. How many gears is that thing? That's so crazy, dude.
But anyway, so this is an example. Like, I'm very, very interested in this idea. I've probably collected every little bit of evidence. And is it possible? Yeah, it's definitely possible. It's possible it played a role. It's possible there's more to it. You could make an argument that the Reagan administration war on drugs was astrologically mediated, but at what point is this factual? At what point is this ignoring real factors that were going into this? At what point am I doing it because it's funny and interesting? And so you have to be self-aware and you have to be responsible about these things, because it's so easy to manipulate people.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've always been acutely aware of it in the realm of psychedelic journalism. I mean, this is like one of the areas where journalistic failure is the norm, right? It is the exception if a journalist isn't failing miserably in their coverage of drugs. We're just used to that.
Of anything.
Well, maybe if anything. Well, I mean, you could. That would be maybe a slightly more cynical interpretation. But yeah, journalists often don't do that well. They do. It's a hard job to be sympathetic to a very unsympathetic occupation. It's a hard job, but they've done a really, really bad job with drugs, and they continue to do an unbelievably terrible job. But what's interesting is we tend not to notice the way these manipulations play out until a decade or so has passed. Like, you look back at the scare stories of the past, and it's literally laughable. It's a joke. Ha ha ha. Right. Your brain on drugs. How stupid was this? Oh, ecstasy makes holes in your brains. How stupid is this? All these things. You know, I was had this huge archive of news reports on MDMA, and you have cops like lecturing other cops about this is a pacifier. The MDMA user puts the pacifier in their mouth to enhance the drug pleasures that they experience. It's all just nuts. But the same thing's happening now. We just are worse at noticing it until a little time has passed. So whatever the dominant narrative is. And I guess crucially, before I even get into the examples, because the issue is that these narratives are so dominant that people haven't even started to question them yet. And often there is some truth to it, right? Like this whole drugs cause brain damage narrative that was the sort of scientific orientation of the 90s. It's potentially true, right? Like under some, drugs can damage your brain under some circumstances.
Right.
For a typical person, holes in their brain is not really the major concern. It's more like disruption of their social and professional and educational existence through dependence on a substance that probably isn't in most instances causing irreversible neurological damage, but it can still have very negative manifestations of one kind or another. So now we went through this era of a hyper reductionist conceptualization of addiction problems in the United States. So the entire opioid problem in the United States can be exclusively tracked to Richard Sackler, right?
Yeah.
It's just, that's it. That's the whole thing. It's like,
Right.
it's very convenient. Wouldn't it be nice? It sure would be nice if it were that simple. If you could blame everything on Richard Sackler.
On one billionaire, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's the whole thing. That's why. That's why all those people died. Just one guy.
Yeah.
But it's like, give me a break. He definitely played a role. I'm not saying it's completely false.
Yeah.
But it's such a laughably reductionist understanding of human motivations for drug use that I struggle to understand how any adult who has lived in the real world could think it is truly that simple, right? It's like the basic idea that I think people struggle with is that they think drugs are responsible for drug problems, which is a very superficial read. Of course, they are, strictly speaking, but the reality is that to even get to a point where you want to hurt yourself with a drug, or you're willing to develop a problematic relationship with a drug, there's usually some kind of social, psychological problem that is putting you in that position to begin with.
What was it like in like the very early days of Vice and producing those shows for Vice? And that goes back like 15, 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So did you like, first of all, how did you start and how did you get in with Vice in the very beginning? And like, what were the meetings like? Like, how did you guys decide what you were going to go film and all of that?
Yeah. I mean, I find it interesting that people always seem sort of amazed by the work that I've done, or they treat it as if it's like very unusual, when Vice is producing tons of drug related documentaries and continues to. So that in and of itself was never a hard sell. Pretty much every mainstream media outlet is continuously producing stuff about drugs. The only difference is I was doing it in a relatively informed way that was pretty well received by people. So the selling aspect was never difficult with Vice, and it all did very well and was insanely low budget at the beginning.
Yeah.
So, it was all gradual. I wrote for the magazine, did a column. Then there was this producer named Santiago Stelli who was really responsible for most of the early Vice video work. Pretty much the entire Vice pivot to video was a product of this one guy, Santiago Stelli. And he was brilliant. He's around. I mean, he left the United States and is long since gone from Vice. But he, I think, was responsible for a lot of that early internationally oriented character, and he would work on crazily low budgets. So, we were going in those early shoots, the total budget of those things would have been effectively nothing. We shoot on what was it, like a 5D or something like that?
Canon 5D.
5D, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Or even before that, mini DV tapes. I mean, these were really.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember those days.
Yeah.
I remember my friend who I used to film surfing with, Jerry. I remember when I knew him way before he worked for Vice, and then all of a sudden I saw him traveling all over the fucking world, going to Antarctica and all these crazy places. I think he went to North Korea.
But he was one of the big ones. He filmed with Shane.
Yeah. I think
Jerry
Ricciotti.
Yeah.
Ricciotti, I think is how you say it. Yeah, and that's when I first discovered all that stuff. When he started traveling to all these fucking places, I'm like, Jerry, how the fuck how did all this happen? It's crazy, man.
It was crazy, but the formula was very smart, which is spend no money whatsoever, just crank stuff out. And this is at the beginning of YouTube, and those things, I mean, they were making money off of them. I think it was actually taken off YouTube, I think because of some kind of copyright issue with one of the pieces of music in it, but the Crystal Cole LSD, underground LSD silo piece that I did had something like 40 million views on YouTube. This was probably made for like $1,100 or something like that. This is just, and then they were making so much of that type of stuff and doing all these brand deals. They had a good model for a while. I mean, one issue is that you have to pay people at some point. People are willing to work that way when they're 21, but eventually you want a situation where you're actually being compensated for the work. So
Yeah.
that
was one of their big selling points, right? Was like, we're so cool, everyone wants to work for us for free.
Right. Yeah, which is a dangerous road to go down, because even if people do want to do that, you can fall into a pattern of exploiting people and creating a lot of bad blood, which absolutely did happen with Vice. Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, it's unusual to find somebody who isn't a Vice hater.
Yeah, especially somebody who worked with them for a long time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I would say it's like pretty much 100% of people.
Thomas is one of them.
Well, yeah. Well, but Thomas is my very close friend, Thomas
Is he?
Morton.
Yeah, Thomas.
We lived together for years.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
I talk to him all the time.
Dude, he's so funny.
You should have him on.
I would love to. I talked to him on the phone once about doing this, and then I think he ghosted me after that. He's like, I'm not fucking gonna hang out with this loser.
I'll text him. He's great. I mean, he's like
I'm a huge fan of his, man.
He's brilliant.
Yeah.
But he was someone who I think worked really well in that environment. There was a certain type of person that maybe had a more impulsive style of creating things that responded very well to the lack of bureaucracy in that environment, which was unusual. Like the typical pattern that you have with journalism is you have tons of middlemen, tons of people micromanaging everything that you do. I mean, I worked for National Geographic for a period, and I was shocked. This actually may be the norm. They expected me, when working on a documentary, to write an entire screenplay for the documentary that would then be approved by executives. And then my task as an interviewer wasn't to talk to people, but it was essentially to reverse engineer the scripted statements in question form.
Oh, wow.
So like,
Jesus, dude.
So that you could come as close to a entirely manufactured piece as possible while still calling it some kind of documentary work. And that's just stupid.
That's the opposite of what the original idea of Vice was, right? It's just like going out into crazy places and turning the camera on and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
Just seeing the insane shit that's happening in the world.
Yeah.
That's so fucking crazy, man.
Expensive. It produced bad results as well.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of things about that model that I think were brilliant and ahead of their time and were copied by lots and lots of people. I mean, they were kind of some of the early people to sort of professionalize YouTube documentary work. This is also before YouTube, but this kind of no budget, fully independent style, even though it was coming from a media outlet.
Right.
That was the idea. It's like, you don't need this typical professional production apparatus. You can just throw people out and make something.
Right. And at what point, what was like the straw that broke the camel's back with Vice? Was it when they like sold out to Rupert Murdoch, or like what was there like a specific point where you realized, and like Thomas realized like it's time to jump ship? Or was it I know there was a lot of layoffs and stuff like that, but like in your perspective, like what was happening internally that caused that?
There were a few things. I mean, one was you had overvaluation of Vice in general. So it was kind of coasting on this massive, what was it, like a $6 billion valuation,
insane.
something nuts that was definitely inflated, not to say that it wasn't worth something. You had an increasingly resentful and tired workforce and an increasingly large number of enemies that had been cultivated by executives at the company. You also had increasing desire from rival media outlets to discredit them, which gives an incentive to write articles about how they're bad or irresponsible.
Yes.
You also had a very ill-advised transition from streaming online video, which they had built their brand on, to cable TV, which was a dying art.
In like 2016, right?
Yeah, at a time when this made really no sense. It's like, I think it kind of speaks to how ill-advised that decision was, that I couldn't watch my own show because I don't have a TV. So
I remember listening to interviews of Shane explaining how great of an idea it was, and like, okay, I think I'm convinced. I'm sold.
It was one of these things where I sort of thought, okay, well, if this is what if this is what is going to bring resources in and allow me to make documentaries, whatever.
Right,
but
right.
in the back of my head, I was always thinking, this seems like a bad idea. And then on top of that, you had this sort of gradual erosion of their identity, which had begun probably because there were different eras, right? You have the kind of Gavin McInnes era, which is oriented entirely around ultra edgy humor. Vice is basically a humor magazine,
Yeah.
a humor, art, fashion magazine. Totally different. And then it goes from that to a sort of transitional literary era that doesn't get talked about very much, where there was this brilliant guy named Jesse Pearson, who is the editor of the magazine, and he's a sort of intellectual who wanted to use it to publish fiction and art, photography, and things like that. And that was around the time that I started working there, and it was actually like a really cool era to be there. Then it goes from comedy Vice to literary Vice to news Vice. That's around the time that the HBO thing
Is that when Spike Jonze came along?
he came along? Well, he was always in the background.
Oh, was he?
But he came along more during the Viceland pivot as someone that was like in the office every day. I don't really think that he had all that much of a. I mean, I think he probably got paid well, but I don't know that he played all that much of a role other than. So then there's news, and that's around the time where they start to have mainstream appeal, and everyone's saying like, "Oh, this is real news. This is the real news network." And then they get hit hard by culture war, propriety concerns, because the edginess that they'd built their brand on suddenly became deeply unfashionable and dangerous reputationally. So they have to pivot to some kind of like social concern. There was actually like I don't know if there's a journalist, Michael Moynihan, who wrote a great piece and did an interview with Barry Weiss about this kind of pivotal moment where young employees at Vice decided that the old covers of the magazine were too offensive to be displayed. And so they all had to be moved out of the lobby into the private office of Sarouche, who was one of the founders of the company.
Right.
And I was there while this was happening, and I remember it. I remember seeing it and thinking that it was unsettling, but also just ignoring it. But he was, I think, correct to point out that this was indicative of rot within the company, where you have the employees saying this entire company is so offensive that we can't look at what it has created, and they start making increasingly bad stuff. After I left, it became kind of like one of the premier sources of anti-psychedelic journalism.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. Again, anti-psychedelic shrouded in sort of social justice type concerns, because this is, we were talking about like the scientific orientation of drug scares in the 90s that shifted in the 21st century to a moralistic orientation. So now if you want to scare people away from using MDMA, you don't say, hey, it's going to make holes in your brain. You say, hey, this is a tool of capitalist oligarchs who are trying to commodify your spirit and make you a more efficient worker while funding the genocide in Gaza. Right, and creating super soldiers. And this is a tool of the imperialist American war machine, right? And so this is the new, and people say, oh, okay. Oh, you're right then. MDMA is bad. Thank you so much for telling me this important information.
Another thing I wanted to ask you was about nitrous. What are the like effects of nitrous on the human body, and like how would you describe? Have you done it?
Oh yeah.
What is like the therapeutic benefit of it?
I mean, the therapeutic benefit is typically, if you're talking about like a sort of FDA approved conventional therapeutic benefit, it's preventing pain during surgical procedures, typically in the context of dentistry, or it's sometimes used by EMTs or things like that in emergency medicine because it's rapid acting.
Yeah.
So that's the benefit, is that it kills pain. It may also have some confined psychotherapeutic benefit, maybe in treatment of PTSD or things like that. It's been investigated. But for the most part, the benefit, and this is actually one interesting historical quirk of nitrous oxide, is that it was originally a recreational drug and then became a medicine. Often it goes the other way around, where you have something like ketamine that's a medicine, and then people realize that it has a really interesting effect outside of a medical context. With nitrous oxide, it was used for fun exclusively at first. There were nitrous parties and people
Whippets.
yeah.
I remember.
Yeah, like from a silk bag, they would inhale it.
Oh, a silk bag.
This is like, I guess, pre-balloon era. You'd maybe have like a waxed silk.
I knew this guy when I was younger. I used to work at a pizza place, and there was this old guy who had a band called the Speed Wobbles, and he would always go to his van on his breaks, and he would go into his van and do whippets, and he had these little canisters of nitrous oxide that he would do. I never tried it, but he would always came in super happy after he did it.
Yeah, it's not, again, I would say it's not the most psychologically interesting effect. It's more like pure hyper intense euphoria, which is one reason that people become addicted to it.
Yeah.
Like miserably, especially during the pandemic. Actually, it seemed like a lot of people started ordering it, and also there was all these giant cans of nitrous you can order. A lot of people developed issues with it. Now they're trying to prohibit it. I don't think that's the path, obviously, but
wasn't Kanye West addicted to it?
horrendously, it probably still is, from everything I can tell. Horrendously addicted, yeah. I think it may.
Do you think that has anything
Yes.
to do with his psychological?
I do.
What do you think happened there? If you were, I know this is like super speculative, but like, do you think that like how would nitrous or any other sort of drugs that he could be on? Because I know he went to like a mental hospital and they probably gave him a lot of different drugs. I don't know if they were SSRIs or what they were, but like, how would that explain his current state?
And I wouldn't go so far as to say that it completely explains it.
Sure.
I think it may
Right.
be a contributor. I mean, I know people that know him. I know a little bit of the backstory, but a lot of it's publicly known.
Yeah.
But when somebody is a celebrity and they're a billionaire and they're very, very powerful, they end up in an interesting power dynamic with medical doctors, which is that if they can find a doctor to give them whatever the fuck they want. And the doctor is in a weird position where they want to please their billionaire client and they also don't want to kill them or hurt them because it could result in the revocation of their license and the loss of the billionaire client.
That's a line you got to dance.
So how do you please this person, give them what they want and not hurt them? And then if you decide, okay, this is getting a little nuts, we got to pump the brakes on this, and the billionaire knows that they can just find someone to replace you instantaneously. So you can engage in a cycle of self-deception where you say, well, it's better me than somebody else because I really care about Ye, and I'm going to be the one that's going to give him this, and I'll be a little bit more cautious or whatever. This is what happened with Michael Jackson as well. So I try to be a little bit sympathetic to the doctors who will face criminal charges for doing this, because they are, like, no one wants to be sympathetic to those doctors. They're in a difficult position.
Yeah.
Like, imagine you're Michael Jackson's doctor and he's asking you for propofol and you think, no, I shouldn't do that. But you also know that if you say no, they're just going to find someone else to give them the propofol. So what do? You give them a little bit and you try to monitor and you hope for the best, and they end up in a really complicated situation. Mm-hmm. There's also, of course, that's a sympathetic analysis of what's going on. There's also, of course, the very real possibility of exploitation and predation from people that are just using them for money. And there's probably plenty of that as well. So there's a dentist that I think he lives in the same building as Kanye and is enabling him with huge amounts of nitrous oxide. That's it, I think. And this isn't, I'm sure that dentist is in a complicated position because Kanye is definitely capable of getting nitrous elsewhere. So what does he do? I don't know. But when you use nitrous continuously, it can result in all kinds of negative effects. Like when I was in high school, the thing that people would always say, they'd say, oh, you do a whip it, don't you know you lose 10,000 brain cells or something like that. That was kind of the little like prohibitionist narrative. That is not the case, assuming that you're co-administering oxygen, but it does result in the destruction of B12. So it can cause a B12 deficiency, which then results in demyelination of neurons and creates a multiple sclerosis type syndrome where people start to lose sensation in their extremities and eventually lose the ability to walk. That's pretty extreme, which is reversible in most instances with B12 administration, but you don't want to get to the position of being in a wheelchair, even if it's potentially reversible. This is like representative of a really severe degree of neurological damage. So that's one of the things that can happen with continuous use. And there's different people that have, again, this comes back to individual genetics as well, because the way that you metabolize the way that your body metabolizes homocysteine and some other things related to B12 metabolism also play a role in all this. It's a little bit complicated. So some people are more susceptible. Also, even your diet and your age, like vegans would be more susceptible because they have a reduced B12 intake, which is primarily from animal products. Anyway, there's a lot of things that go into this. But then you also have the reality that you're just continuously entering this dissociated state, and it's going to make you all whacked out, and he could be doing that instead of taking treatments for bipolar disorder and becoming manic and deranged, and maybe he's surrounded by people that don't have the desire or power to try to rein him in. It seems like it's probably very difficult based on everything that I've seen. And somebody can, I mean, it is amazing. I don't know if you know people with bipolar, but I feel like it's something that is often talked about as if it's not really that big of a deal. It's kind of like schizophrenia is really, really bad, but like bipolar, you just take like a pill and whatever. But it is amazing how much damage somebody can do to their life when they're manic in like 2 days. Like I have a close friend of mine. Like if you are fully manic, you can just destroy everything in a couple days. So you are dependent on people reining you in, which is also complicated because when somebody is in that state, they don't want help. They will perceive any intervention as somebody attempting to silence them or oppress them in a paranoid delusion. So it's not easy.
Right. Yeah, I just wonder like what other kind of drugs he's been given that are being combined with that's just like sending him into just a fucking never-ending spiral, you know? There's so many like weird, like you would never think. I never would have suspected nitrous of all the things, but then you know, maybe he's just getting a lot of new grills being made or something like that, and that has something to do with it. Like when you're getting that work done and getting gold teeth, maybe that just comes with the territory. I don't know.
And the insane stress of being publicly scrutinized the way that he is. And it's all for sure. It's all like very unrelatable, I would say, to the typical person. Like this is just like a life that is so abstract, so different from anything that a typical person would ever encounter. And although you could say that it touches on issues that are relatable, which is like what to do with people who need help but don't want to accept it. And is it, humane to allow somebody to behave in a self-destructive manner, and what is the line between personal autonomy and the need for a society to step in and prevent somebody from harming themselves?
Right.
Where do you find that? These are complicated
and when
issues.
you're people when you're a person like Kanye, like a public figure who has like an exorbitant amount of money, and like you described, having just like unlimited access to doctors who could get you anything you want. Like, yeah, nobody knows what the fuck that's like. Or like, even like Jordan Peterson, who's another great example, who, went through, I think he was, he had to go somewhere like out of the country to do some sort of therapy. I forget what kind of therapy he was doing, but he was getting
Xenon, among other things.
What was it?
Xenon.
Xenon.
Yeah.
And he's another person who was like super polarizing and went from being like a professor at a university to being arguably like one of the most popular people on the face of the earth, who half the people loved him and then half the people absolutely despised him for the stuff that he was saying. And how that plays a role in someone's psychology and the way that people, like normal people, will perceive them. We're talking about David Nichols. Travis told me about this. He was saying that David got some crazy DARPA grant to work on psychedelics, the use of what was the psychedelic? Some sort of psychedelic for soldiers. And we actually looked it up, and it wasn't David Nichols. It was somebody else. It was I think the head of his department.
It's Brian Roth.
Okay, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And allegedly, I mean, who knows what the fuck DARPA is doing? Allegedly, according to the grant, according to all the published research on it, is that they're trying to take the psychedelic trip out of these drugs so that they can get the benefit of the therapy for use as a PTSD or battle fatigue, things like this. Mm-hmm. But according to Travis, there's this dude named Dana Beal who is trafficking ibogaine to the front lines of the Ukraine to give the Ukrainian soldiers so that they can enhance their edge detection and their aim on the battlefield. And also to combat battle fatigue so they can get right back out there and continue fighting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm friends with Dana Beal.
Are you really?
Yeah. Yeah. He's a character.
Wild dude.
Yeah. He's one of the original New York City psychedelic weirdos.
Oh,
and
okay.
Everybody knows Dana Beal.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that he's doing that. I would say that's a very separate thing from Brian Roth's work, which is funded by DARPA and is published and publicly available and brilliant and beneficial to all of humanity. It's actually not clinical work. It's basic scientific research that has been the most important work ever published on the structure of the serotonin 2A and 2B receptor. And he very recently published a new paper that goes even further in elucidating how different psychedelics interact with the protein and how these different types of interactions produce either psychedelic or non-psychedelic effects. So there's nothing even remotely nefarious about any of the work that Brian Roth is doing. It's some of the most important cutting-edge pharmacology on serotonin 2A agonists that exists.
And the idea, if I'm correct, is taking the trip out of the psychedelics so that people can get it without the sort of hallucination or
That's part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of it, definitely.
But like the question is like, do you get that same benefit from these drugs without the psychedelic effect?
It depends on what benefit you're describing and what you're looking for and who the patient is and what the disorder is and exactly, because you conceivably have a full spectrum of psychedelic to not psychedelic. And maybe at one point on the spectrum for a certain type of person, you're getting the benefit and maybe not. And what about the duration? And what about the environment? And what about a million and the frequency of dosing and a million things? It's very hard to say what is optimal. I try to keep an open mind because I think people can be very moralistic about things like this, or they'll say like, oh, you're just commodifying this and destroying the spirituality and destroying the whole thing that makes this valuable and making it into the next Prozac.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand the argument, but we should explore everything and see what's out there, because Brian Roth's work, you could look at this two ways. You could say, oh, he's studying non-psychedelic psychedelics, but part of studying non-psychedelic psychedelics is also recognizing what creates a psychedelic. You can kind of move in both directions. So one of the big subjects of this work has been biased signaling at the serotonin 2A receptor, and whether a receptor interaction that is associated with something called beta arrestin, or GQ, is responsible for the psychedelic effect. And this work has allowed us to better understand what makes psychedelic in terms of their molecular neuropharmacology. It's been very important. So I don't see these things as like two things that exist in opposition to one another. You could argue in the same direction and say that studying psychedelics shows you what you need for maybe like in this instance, GQ biased path that would be more likely to be psychedelic. But I think the basic thing is like, the psychedelic experience is incredibly powerful and is maybe unsuitable for certain types of people and maybe not beneficial. And if you had a way of dialing it down a little bit, that could allow certain benefits of psychedelics, which may have little to do with what we typically associate with the psychedelic experience, right? There's a neuroscientist, pharmacologist named Chuck Nichols, and he did a lot of work on the anti-inflammatory effects of different psychedelic compounds. So he's showing that there could be a therapeutic effect from psychedelics that's completely separate from what we typically conceptualize as the therapeutic effect of psychedelics, right? Same thing goes for treatment of addiction, treatment of cluster headaches, right? Thinking that the point of a psychedelic experience is have this religious, transcendent, hypervisual experience, I think is somewhat reductive, because who's to say what they can or can't do or should or shouldn't do? So I'm in support of people that are exploring every avenue of what can happen at serotonin receptors.
Yes. And the serotonin 2A receptor is what's primarily responsible for the psychedelic experience that you receive
With the classical psychedelics.
And we and humans have had this receptor forever, like as far as we know.
Seems like it, yeah.
So
I mean, even non-humans have it.
Even non-humans have it?
Even non-humans have it.
Like
rodents have it.
Rodents have a 2A receptor?
Oh, yeah.
So do we know, or do we have, there's no way to know if they can experience anything similar to what we experience when you give them these drugs.
There's no way to know whether another human being is experiencing anything similar to what you're experiencing.
That's a really good point.
There's a lot of unknown when it comes to the internal experience of another organism.
Yeah.
But what we do know, and it sounds incredibly abstract, but it's actually a robust predictor, is that when you give a rodent a 5-HT2A agonist that has GQ bias signaling and even balanced, it seems to cause their heads to twitch. And that head twitch is strongly associated with psychedelic effects. In humans, there are exceptions, but it's for something as abstract as this sort of wet dog shake, head twitch thing, it's pretty good. It's better than you would think. It's the sort of thing where if you're looking at a scientific paper, you could laugh at it and say, oh, they're saying this mouse switching its head predicts psychedelic activity in humans. These silly scientists, they're so, they don't get it at all. Turns out it's actually pretty damn predictive.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do we know about, like, other than like, I know you can reduce the dose of these things and like microdose things like psilocybin and other stuff, but like, what are the performance enhancing effects of psychedelics? And like, is there like an optimal dose for like cognitive enhancement? Because I know there's like a correlation with psychedelics and like growth of new neurons in the brain. Is this right?
Under some experimental conditions, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, it's so hard to say because what constitutes performance enhancement could be radically different between people.
Sure, and what's the goal?
Yeah, performance enhancement for a guitarist might be totally different for an air traffic controller.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I just always thought that this stuff made people smarter because the smartest people I know are like take a lot of psychedelics.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a psychologically interesting experience that maybe certain types of people are drawn to, or interested in consciousness. And yeah, I would hesitate to say that it can make you smarter, but I think it can make you more aware of certain things, and it can be very inspiring for some people.
Yeah.
And for someone like me that's not religiously inclined, it can give you a taste of what I imagine religious experience is like for people that are.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that DMT experiment where they shine the laser on the wall?
Yeah.
What did you make of that?
I think it's interesting. I think it is. I'm not persuaded that the code of the simulation is being revealed through this process. I mean, I appreciate the attempt to assess something like that. I think it's as an idea. I think it's very cool. I've gone to the website of the guy who's at the forefront of this DMT laser examination technique. Has some weird stuff like eating chocolate and viewing it through a glass of water. I mean,
oh really? I haven't seen that one.
The obvious issue is that if you're taking a drug that causes visual hallucinations in order to see this otherwise invisible phenomenon, that it could very well be a product of hallucinations.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But the fact is like the interesting thing is you're giving, so he says that I think hundreds of people have done it and reported to him seeing the same exact code that he describes, which is this like Sanskrit looking Japanese katakana style matrix dripping code that exists behind this laser beam when it's projected on a wall. And like, I don't know if I know like, I haven't done a lot of DMT, but I know people explain that DMT is, a lot of people see very similar things when they're on DMT, like different, like similar patterns. Some people see these elf things, but there's nothing else that I've ever heard of that is consistent across a lot of experiences similar to this code that people are explaining they're seeing. And I mean, one of my questions when I asked him, I was like, is it an issue that they're watching your documentary and seeing this code on the wall, and then they're trying to do it themselves, and they're kind of confirming what they already were expecting to see? Is that a problem? I don't know.
I would say it is a problem.
Yeah.
But it's a common problem. I mean, same thing with the machine elves, as you said. And this has been studied from pretty much the beginning of psychedelic research. Heinrich Kluver coined this term form constants, and he was very interested in this idea that people's visual distortions or hallucinations under the influence of mescaline appear to have certain themes, like a honeycomb pattern or a spiderweb type pattern or like a sort of tube type pattern or whatever. And now you hear people describing, often seeing Alex Gray type imagery. Is that because many people who are interested in psychedelics have been exposed to Alex Gray imagery? Is it because Alex Gray was able to capture some kind of characteristic that is maybe just present in the psychedelic experience because we have similar central nervous systems and other visionary people? I mean, one thing about Alex Gray is that he's using a lot of motifs that have also been explored in religious artwork as well. So it's not as if he's the only person to ever explore these types of images. They do obviously have a particular resonance with people that use psychedelics, but I think that there's this interplay between human biology and psychology and art where it's all interwoven.
Gallimore was explaining how throughout history there has been multiple documents of people taking different psychedelics and explaining how they saw code on different psychedelics throughout history in various studies. So, but I don't know if any of them were as similar as this DMT thing. You know, it's interesting to me that like if this DMT is actually stripping away this sort of brain filter hypothesis, how you have like these filters that filter reality, and the DMT kind of like breaks the filters away, so you're sort of seeing the brain is exposed to more sensory input, and if that's really, if something like that is actually happening, and then you're bringing like a laser into it, like that's a super interesting experiment. And if it's like, if the laser is acting like a microscope in the visual field or in the brain, it would just be, you know, what does that even mean? You know, if people are all seeing this, is this some sort of like epigenetic thing in the human brain that is happening because we're combining these we're taking in these chemicals and exposing ourselves to a certain light frequency? Or like, are we seeing the actual Matrix? Are we living in the fucking Matrix?
I would definitely bet against that. That would be, you know, that would be the last explanation that I would go for, which is not to say that it's impossible.
Right.
But when you're kind of creating the flowchart of possibility, it's usually good to start at the most likely scenario. And then if you can't explain something with the most likely scenario, you then go to the next most likely scenario.
Yeah.
So the most likely scenario in this situation is that a combination of suggestion, expectation, and the visual hallucinations that are produced by DMT are causing people to see characters that they are interpreting as being similar, but they can't really say that with certainty because nobody's able to take a snapshot of whatever it is that they're seeing.
Right.
And it's obviously a better story, and it would feel better if you saw the same thing as someone else than something that was subtly different or totally different. And what even are these characters? If you draw them, are we really totally sure? The very fact that they're unrecognizable and not in a language that we speak gives them a lot of latitude to be different. And then there's also just the kind of language that we use to describe things that are unfamiliar. You know, if you see something that is weird, what do you say about it? If you see lights in the sky, do you say that's a UFO? Do you say that it's gods? Do you say that
try to fit it into a box
that it's witches? Yeah,
Right.
it's dependent on your culture and what language you use to describe the unfamiliar and the inexplicable.
Yeah.
So when you look at earlier psychedelic experiences, I don't think I'm aware of the word alien being used very frequently. People saying this seems alien. Often I do see descriptions of things being like Egyptian or associated with other cultures. But I don't think alien in the like early 1960s type stuff. Now you'd see that more frequently because aliens have become a much bigger part of our culture subsequently. And the same thing goes for the way different indigenous groups conceptualize these things, which are very much based on their, like I would imagine that if you were to go to Peru and do this experiment, the matrix line thing might be less frequently encountered as an explanation because the matrix, I mean, it kind of depends on who you talk to. I'm sure there's people, indigenous cactus users who have also seen the Matrix. It's a pretty popular movie, pretty good movie.
Yeah.
But assuming that they haven't seen the Matrix, I have a feeling that and the current popularity of simulation hypothesis thinking wouldn't be the first explanation that they go to.
Hold on, let me crack open this fresh can of
But I don't mean to be a hater on this kind of thing. Like I do, I do find all that stuff very interesting and
so good.
And careful observation of the world is how you discover things. So it's like I understand how you could look at, you know, someone, you know, looking at a laser through a water glass or whatever and say like this is fucking. This is like like this is ridiculous. But it's like you probably could have. I'm sure there were people that would have said the same thing about early microscopists, like looking into a droplet of water and saying like, what are they doing? Like, oh, they think they see little like organisms in this droplet of pond water. Like, it's crazy.
Well, I did it. I tried the experiment, and it was also the first time I ever tried DMT, and I didn't see the code.
Oh,
I saw millions and millions of little gears rotating and connected, just all spinning like behind the wall. No code at all.
Oh, interesting.
And I watched the documentary like the day before, or not the teaser for the documentary the day before I did that. And so I was like looking for the code, but I couldn't find it. All I could see was these gears spinning. But maybe I didn't get high enough. Maybe I needed to do more DMT to see it. I don't know.
Right.
It was my first time ever doing it.
Right.